Maria did, and how that, in fact, impacts our lives. And as soon as we understand what it was and how we did it, I think we can then drop it and just see each other as fellow human beings. That is my wish, and in my ultimate goal of all that I do, that is my ambition. So I want to start telling you about Elaine Dowe when she entered school. I was a native of Roanoke. I was born in Roanoke, Virginia, and I moved to the village of Elliston when I was 3 years old. That was my father's birthplace. I was the second of 3 children, and I had that. How many people in here are middle children? That's a pretty rough place to be born, isn't it? You know, the funny things happen when you're in the middle of an older person and a younger person. All are very, very distinguished in their place in family life. And there you are, Little Miss Middle. So I was Little Miss Middle, and my mother's name was Talma Sorrell, a native of Giles County. And my father, of course, was a native of Montgomery County, Albert Dowe. I attended the elementary school. When I first started at Christian in Elliston, there were 2 school teachers, and then the school population, interestingly enough, grew small, too small for a 2-room school, so I became, in my second year of school, I was in a 1-room school. I entered elementary school in 1940, and I graduated in 1944. Now that was a Herculean leap. But it was because I was a very quick learner, and I was a very talkative and disturbing student when I wasn't busy. And it's hard to keep everybody busy when you have 7 grades in 1 room. So I was sort of a torture to my teachers. And luckily, my own mother had taught school for a couple of years and had 1 year of college education at Fisk University. And she was the consultant to my teachers as to how to make little Elaine shut her mouth and go to work. And I did wonderful things. I made up stories. I read to the 1st grade. I helped the cook prepare for the free luncheons that we all had during World War II. When I hit Christiansburg Institute, I had a reputation. One was a talker. The other was a very, very quick learner, and a child who had a very vivid imagination, who loved to play. I made stories up all the time. I took 4 and 5 and 6 different roles as I played with my paper dolls. My mother let me have the privilege of talking aloud to myself, and I spent days and hours all by myself in my stories. I had also, at 8 years old, become familiar with the stage. I began to recite dialect poetry that I had learned about Paul Laurence Dunbar from my father's oldest brother. And I loved to speak in dialect because my mother was so emphatic about my not. So I could say dis and dat and get and anything I wanted to say as long as I was quoting Paul Laurence Dunbar. So that reputation entered Christiansburg Institute with me, and obviously the carrier of that message was my age. Why would a 10-year-old be in high school if there was something unusual about her? And thus I entered a place. I knew Christiansburg Institute because my sister was a junior when I was a freshman. So I knew that there were all these buildings. I knew it was a wonderful place to be, and I was proud of it. In order to get to school, I was 10 years old. We boarded the bus from Elliston at 7:15, 6:45 in the morning. And we meandered up to Shawsville, up to Dark Run. For people who are not local to Montgomery County, they probably never heard of Dark Run, and many of you probably haven't heard of it who are young. But that was one of the hollows off of Shawsville. And we moved to Christiansburg, and we managed to arrive on most days late because our bus could not take the mountain, and we would just sort of crawl up it. The bus was cold. We did not have a heated bus until I was a junior. There were hand-me-down buses that broke down a lot. We got caught in the mud. But so that was an arduous task, and we usually got home between 5:30 and 7 o'clock. And then we went immediately into lessons. I'm going to take 2 incidents, as I said, And the first one is a volunteer activity on my part. Performance was extremely important at Christiansburg Institute. Every student was on stage at some point during the school year, or at least in every other year. We played roles, we entertained. It was the cultural center for the whole of New River Valley. We were a regional high school, and we were the only high school in the New River Valley. But I volunteered for the Glee Club. I loved to sing. In fact, my ambition at the age of 5 was to be a blues singer. And my favorite one was the St. Louis Blues. I would sit in my room and open the window and actually sit there and scream out my poor voice to the whole of the Elliston Brake Road until my daddy put a stop to it one day. I think he thought I was disturbing the peace. But anyway, I joined the Glee Club, and Mr. Holmes was a CI grad, a resident of Christiansburg, had finished Howard University with his degree in a wonderful music department at Howard. He had finished there with his major in music, and during World War II, he trained and conducted a lot of the Army bands. So he came back to Christiansburg Institute. He was drafted in his first year of teaching. He came back and he started a music program. And he formed the choir, and I volunteered. Well, after about 2 sessions with the crowd at large, he had heard every voice, and unbeknownst to me, he had heard mine. And I cannot sing in key. My ear is impossible. How many people cannot sing in key? I can't hold it for not one repeat. So there I was, standing next to my musically talented sister, and he was testing us. We were an all-women choir, and we had 3 voices. And he named me to 2 of my first cousins, and I knew that they could not hold a key. So I knew I could not hold a key, and there I was. Well, when he told us to sing, I started to cry. I didn't make a sound, but the tears rolled down because I knew I was out of the choir. There was no way that he was going to let me stay there. And I didn't have the language of music to know that I could not sing in key. I just knew that if I was like Camellia and Goldie, I was in trouble. And so that was it. And I then began to cry aloud, and my sister was humiliated. She came over, she reprimanded me very severely, and there was Mr. Holmes watching all of this. There were all of the other students watching all of this. Mr. Holmes asked Doris Morgan, my sister's classmate, to come over and take care of me. Every day at Christiansburg Institute, we had something we called going to chapel. Our auditorium seated 250 students, and we spent a half an hour in what I would call stimulation and reflection. A part of that program each time was 1 or 2 students performing. And so to miss chapel, though, was to get our principal knew every face on the campus and every name. So he looked at the audience, and if you weren't there, you were in serious trouble. I reinforce what you said, Patrice, about order and discipline. And there were certain things you just did not do. You did not talk in an aggressive manner or physical manner to your students, your fellow students, or your faculty. To do that, you were at the discretion of the principal as to whether or not you would be suspended and for how long. So that was not a question. He did not mind sending anybody home. He would get one of the teachers to drive a car and take you there. He would not even let you wait for the bus. So that kind of rigor, that this is a serious place, there are rules here, and we will protect you, we will push you, we will train you, we will teach you, we will coach you, but we will not tolerate certain kinds of behavior on this campus. So being consoled by such a sweet person as Doris Morgan, I blurted out that Mr. Holmes, in my opinion, was a gray-eyed devil. And he heard it, and everybody in that room heard it. And people gasped, because that was suspension time, wasn't it? And I didn't know what was going to happen. All he told was Doris to take care of me, that both of us would be excused from chapel because he would speak to Mr. Jones, and to just take care of me. Well, I wasn't suspended. It wasn't talked about anymore. I was just out of the choir, which was hard enough for me to tolerate as a kid. I think I was 11 years old when this happened. So, one day, I saw Mr. Holmes's car coming up the Brake Road, and I thought, okay, now they're getting around to putting me out of school. Mr. Holmes, I had a habit in my family of going in the back door whenever we had guests, going to the top of the stairs and eavesdropping. We had a wide open arch, and every word said in the living room I could hear. Mr. Holmes had come to see how I was feeling, to apologize to my mother because he knew how deep the hurt was for me at my age, and asked my mother's permission to, he asked her to tell me to drop music education because I had no ear, and that he hated to see students waste their time trying to make strength of a place where they would never be able to make strength. And so he wanted me to drop music and to focus on my vocals, focus on my ability to speak, my ability to remember, my ability to act. And then he asked Mama's permission to let me travel with the band and glee club on all of their community-based concerts and tours. And he would give me a role as a speaker. So I became the mistress of ceremony. I introduced programs. I gave the audience instructions at intermission as to where the restrooms were and things like that. And I was, every time the buses rolled out, I was there. That to me was one of the most sensitive things in my life. It encouraged me to try to find ways to control my own behavior. And it let me know that it was the students who got in the most trouble that got the most understanding and the most support. Now already I was leading my class with straight A's. Teachers didn't interfere with me at all. I would see them talking to other students who weren't doing well. And I began to know that my straight A's were mine to earn, that the help that most students needed to learn did not have to be applied to me. So I didn't feel competitive, they didn't feel competitive, because they shifted the emphasis of their relationships with children. Somewhere in my educational system, particularly when I got into graduate school, it became just the opposite. The people who made the highest grades got all the attention. The ones who were flunking out were encouraged to go as soon as possible. And my notion of an educational institution still remains to this day, is that since we all share that God-given talent of being able to learn, that is embedded in our nature like the blood that flows through our body, to be excited about learning is just as natural to us as it is for dogs picking up scents. And so why would we, in fact, believe that because someone is failing, they are no good, they are to be ignored, and they are to be treated with punitive measures? I think we have to flip-flop on that and begin to know that the students who have all of the capacity to move ahead in the curriculum at the top of the line, you can say hi to them, you can love them, you can treat them with respect, but you don't have to worry too much about them. They found a way of making it whole. And so that was one incident. And I have never forgotten it, because Mr. Holmes becomes to me the model of what it means to handle a problem in relationship to the student you're dealing with, and not the rules of the school. Because right now you're dealing with a child that is young, that is hurt, and the question becomes, how do you keep her going? How do you keep her commitment? More importantly, how do you save her from total humiliation? Humiliation is a treacherous part of our life, isn't it? We get humiliated enough and we just become angry. But we lose a lot of our human powers. My perception only, but I think it can be borne out psychologically. The final incident was a much different one. In our school, Mr. Giles was what we call our SAT program. He taught seniors, and the course was government, but in the course of teaching government, he managed to take every youngster who was bound for college through the most rigorous set of questions that you've ever been imposed, and they didn't relate to government at all. I had done very well in school because I had an extraordinary memory. And what I didn't like, I just memorized and forgot, pushed it out of my mind. And one of those happened to be geometry. And he confronted me one day, and I was now 13. I was a teenager. I began to know that teachers don't know everything, parents don't know everything, but I know everything. So I was a classic adolescent. So I decided that if I wanted to talk back to Mr. Giles and tell Mr. Giles the truth, that was the appropriate thing for a teenager. So I did. And he said to me, "Miss Dowe, you're headed for college. You're leading your class, and you don't know anything about geometry." And I said, "No, I don't, Mr. Giles, I really don't." He said, "Well, you made all A's." I said, "Yes, I do. I know made all A's." I thought to myself, what do you think? I didn't read my report card, but I didn't go that far. Today, a teenager would go that far to defend themselves. So I said, well, if you had a teacher as dumb as Mr. Milton, you wouldn't know geometry either. And the whole class gasped. Mr. Giles, who stumbled more, just, "Miss Dowe, shut up." I shut up. Now, Mr. Giles had to be called an authoritarian. He was not a good classroom teacher, at least of young people. He never mentioned it before until my 6 weeks grade came out, when I answered all my government questions. When I made an A on his test, he gave me a B+. And this time I went to my mother, and I said, "Mama, this grade is not fair." I had learned from Mr. Giles not to ever try to defend myself with him again. It was impossible. So I told Mama, and Mama took care of Mr. Giles. She asked Daddy to take her to Christiansburg. He did, and they both talked to him about why would he diminish my grade in government, because I didn't know geometry. And Daddy said maybe somebody should teach her geometry rather than penalizing her grade. Well, with that, the next grade turned out to be an A, and off we went. And I was happy. I felt victorious. I did not disrespect Mr. Giles for his role, and I began to. But each time, as a child, I recall trying to curb my behavior. Mouth almighty, had to shut up sometimes. So after that, I had another thing happen. One day I saw Mr. Giles's car coming up the road, and I thought, oh, this is it. They're going to put me out at the end of the term or something. And so I ran to the top of the stairs, and Mr. Giles was coming to say to my mother that he would not be letting me participate in the construction of my valedictorian address. What I knew at the time, that there was a change in the atmosphere at Christiansburg Institute. I did not find out until I got into the history of Christiansburg Institute a few years ago. I uncovered the fact that the Pulaski County, which was a part of our regional system, was being taken to court by the NAACP by not providing local high school, secondary school education in Pulaski. And I think Peter will probably address that more fully. But I didn't know that. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that there was something going on, and we all knew that the rumor was all around that Mr. Giles was going to be fired from his job in 1948 May, when we were graduating. So Mr. Giles had come to say to my mother that the reason he wasn't doing, and he said, "You can handle Elaine better than I. Help her understand that this address is my farewell address, and I want her to do her best." And my mother, for the first time that I can recall, defended me completely by saying, "Elaine always does her best when she is asked to do something to represent somebody else." And that's paraphrasing, but that was the point. And I took that to heart. His address had to do with the confirmation of his loyalty, not only to the school, but to the county and to the United States government, to the state of Virginia. I was in my enactment, I had to go out over and pull the flags so that everybody could see them. This man was being put on, he was being put on the carpet. I'm sure he was being called a communist, anything that would denigrate him in any way to get him out of that school. And I took his side and I delivered my address. And that day I was lifted from the stage by my loyal and very special teacher, Mr. Holmes. I was 4'8", I was 14 years old, but I was headed out into the world with 3 incredible ingredients. Number one, that school had taught me that I had a very strong mind. It had taught me to transcend my personal behaviors and to make commitment to others and to provide service. And so when I boarded a plane, the first person in my family to fly, to head to the suburban Chicago to enter an all-white school, that I had learned that racism was a problem, but it was not universal. I had learned from the Quakers who were still in our school, and Mr. Scattergood, when he extended his hand and introduced himself to me, was the first time I'd ever looked a white person in the eye. And he said, "I'm Henry Scattergood," and I said, "I'm Elaine Dowe." And so I knew that he was all right. So I could enter a school and a world, an urban area, very sophisticated, very upper class fellow students with competence, with self-respect, and a belief that education was the most important and the most exciting venture of my life. And here I am today, revitalizing a place that could instill that in me, but hundreds of students through the years for 100 consecutive years. So thank you. And now, Peter, I turn it over to you.
Not going to tell you about my grandfolks. Not going to tell you about growing up. Not going to tell you about one-room school I began in. Just going to say, I'm a historian. I rattle around in the past. I go back into the past and I go back into the paster. And I often get lost there, which is how I do my work. And then I report back what I found. A dozen years ago, I was writing a book about Virginia Tech. I was interviewed when the book came out. The story the next day said, Professor Wallenstein says sometimes he comes to campus, has this bewildered look on his face. Can't figure out, what are those things on the Performing Arts building? You call them fire escapes? Air conditioners? Wasn't always there. What are these things people are driving around? Do you call them automobiles? How did this campus get so big? Where did all those female students come from? So this time machine